NSFW. What is the best NSFW historical fact you know? The oldest known objects that were probably SX toys were made out of stone and animal dung car. 30k years ago. The oldest known objects that were definitely SX toys were anatomically shaped jade and bronze dildos butt plugs dating back to 3000 years. King Edward VI of England had an elaborate SX chair. Fath Ali Shah Qajar, second king in Qajar dynasty in Iran, about 200 years ago, had 160 wives. Nasiruddin Shah Qajar had about 50. In Islam you're not allowed to marry more than 4 wives at the same time. It is said that Nasiruddin Shah was once walking in his palace and saw a beautiful girl and asked if he could marry her. Everyone was looking at him weirdly and he asked why. One of his servants said that she was his daughter. The ancient city of Alexandria had one of the most famous red light districts, brothels, in the world. Once the prostitutes went on a strike and the economy of the city was at risk. So Cleopatra consulted one of the wise men in the library. And he suggested that they build another district as a competitor. Then they had 2 districts and the prostitutes of the first district had to end their strike. Oh wise man. The wenches aren't working and we're in financial ruin. Whatever shall we do? Mary Shelley lost her virginity on her mother's grave. The OG Goth GF. Charles II, Charles the Impotent, was the convergence point for several generations of royal inbreeding and was born with significant disabilities. His parents were desperate for him to produce an heir. They implemented a system of ropes and pulleys to lower virgins onto him in hopes he could impregnate one. It didn't work and the dynasty collapsed. Ottoman Padishah Selim II died by stepping on a soap and falling while chasing girls in his harem. Pretty sure Salvador Dali took imprints of a lot of people's asshole folds and made the shocking discovery that each and every butthole fold that exists is unique in its foldiness. In ancient Greece, prostitutes used to press "follow me" into their sandals so that when they walked it would imprint into the dirt or sand. So when people saw it they'd know that they could follow the trail and it would end in a prostitute and maybe some SX. There's a sculpture I love called the Slipper Slapper that shows Aphrodite and Pan. And she is, edit. My bad, this is not true, holding a sandal with "follow me" on the bottom. Big edit. Sorry. I appear to have misunderstood a professor and then didn't follow up before posting. The Slipper Slapper is a beautiful sculpture, but does not have "follow me" studded on the bottom in Greek. My bad for not researching the statue more before posting. In the 1840s, England had a parliamentary investigation into women working in coal mines. Not about the frequent deaths, men and women, or the conditions, horrible, working there. And not even that the women work bare-chested alongside the men, but over the fact that the women wore trousers while doing so. The painter John Ruskin supposedly broke up with his wife after seeing her naked because he was too disgusted to consummate the marriage. She then married another artist. It's believed that this is most likely because she had pubic hair. And he didn't realize that was normal because he had only seen nude classical statues and children. The inventor of the modern bra had a dog named Clitoris. When Victor Hugo died, all the prostitutes in Paris took a holiday to mourn him. They all got to know him pretty well, if you know what I mean. 18th century Empress of Russia Catherine the Great employed foot ticklers to turn her on. Her furniture had actual penises on it. Carved furniture penises. A lady I can respect for that if nothing else. Saint Lawrence was martyred on a gridiron. His last words were, "I'm well done on this side. Turn me over." He's now the patron saint of cooks and comedians. I'm not making any of this up. Hitler had the hots for his niece Jelly Rorbel, 17-23 years old, who was found dead in her bedroom after she shot herself in the chest with his own gun. Noting the fact that she lived with him until 1931. There are a lot of controversial aspects to that story, but also a lot of interesting pieces of information. Some historians speculate that they had a bizarre relationship and that, probably, she was the love of his life. He mourned her death for a week locked in her bedroom, denied food and wanted to kill himself. After that he kept her room as a shrine and kept her memories with him until near his death. Semicolon. So weird when banging your underage niece isn't the worst things you did in life. A merkin is a replacement wig for pubic hairs prostitutes used to use after they shaved theirs due to pubic lice. Merkins are regularly used in cinema. For some reason it's more acceptable to show fake pubic hair than the real deal. Pedicabo ego vos eteramabo, a classic line of Latin poetry and the first thing I say when people ask me to say something in Latin. It means I'll sodomize and fasseduck you. It was written by the famous poet Catullus, who also did the whole Million Kisses poem everyone needs to translate in Latin class. Roman Emperor Commodus had a harem of 300 women and men and spent most of his time there. If you had a harem that size, you'd do the same. Not so much as historically as biblical. According to the Bible, right when Jesus is getting arrested by the Romans, a random unnamed naked guy just runs past everyone. He is never mentioned again and it is unknown why they even put in the Bible. It's Mark 14. 51-52 if you want to check it out. He's probably going to be a key character in the second coming. It's one of those Chekhov's guns things. Belarus, World War II. A high-ranking Nazi officer had a brothel concubine set up. Obviously. Not consensual. Well, some of the ladies didn't like the situation. And didn't like Nazis. So they put a landmine under his mattress. I call it the Belarusian space program. Lyndon Johnson supposedly got a Secret Serviceman to stand in front because he had to pee and be shielded from view. Lyndon Johnson purposefully peed on the Secret Serviceman's leg knowing full and well he wouldn't budge. Mathematician Kurt Gödel suffered from mental illness and was paranoid he was going to be poisoned. He would only eat food his wife had prepared for him. In 1977, she was hospitalized for 6 months and could no longer prepare his food. In her absence, he refused to eat and eventually starved to death. He only weighed 65 pounds when he died. He couldn't have made himself a goddamn sandwich. The first vibrating DLDO was diesel powered. BRRRRTTRRTTRTTRTT. What's that noise? Oh. That? Nothing. Just my wife's treatment for hysteria. My understanding is that most common folk throughout much of history had very meager lodgings. And most families would sleep together both for warmth as well as the simple fact that they didn't have the space for people to sleep separately. If mom and dad were in the mood to procreate, the rest of the family was just there. In the War for Texas Independence against Mexico, after the Battle of the Alamo, there was this Mexican woman who was a spy for Texas. Nicknamed the Yellow Rose of Texas, she went and seduced the Mexican General Santa Anna. And while they were hooking up, the Texans did a surprise attack and slaughtered many Mexicans and won the war. WTF. They didn't teach me this in 4th grade Texas history. I was told that he was just sleeping. King Edward II of England was apparently tortured before death, which included shoving a red hot poker up his bum to burn his insides out. Whilst alive. There does remain some debate about this, but I was taught this in school. William the Conqueror allegedly smashed his testicles on the pommel of his horse's saddle, which eventually killed him. But that's not the end of it. During his funeral ceremony, they had placed him in a stone coffin sarcophagus thing. It was unusually hot that day and his body swelled. Well, the coffin did not. So during his funeral, where he died by smashing his nuts, his body exploded. Don't know if it's true, but my history teacher told me about this one prostitute that got out of dying or something by showing the judges her boobs, claiming it would be against gods to destroy something so beautiful. According to the story I heard, that was in ancient Greece, which believed beauty was an indicator of virtue. Thus, a defense rested on being so beautiful she was obviously too virtuous to commit a crime. Edit. George Washington. in his youth, was a handsome, strapping young man that all the women and officers' wives wanted to screw. I heard he had like 30 goddamn DCKS. During Qing dynasties in China, 1644-1911, the imperial bureaucracy employed thousands of eunuchs. They were emasculated using a curved knife, and both their testicles and penis were removed. This emasculation process left the eunuchs unable to control their bladders, and they would PSS themselves without warning. They developed such a reputation for malodorousness that there's still a Mandarin saying stinky as a eunuch. The eunuchs placed their now removed genitalia in a special sealed container called a bao, which was then placed on a high shelf. When the eunuch died and was buried, the bao was entombed alongside, as they believed they would be born into the afterlife with their genitalia reattached. Composer Percy Grainger left the chests in his final days to be opened at a date years beyond his death. The chest contained BDSM equipment as well as numerous nudes of him being tied up and exposing his lashings. He included a note about how he was worried about being rejected due to his Zul habits, but knew that the world would find out at some point. He hangs dong. While receiving oral sex in hot tubs, JFK would hold women's heads underwater during climax. His back pains were so severe Secret Service helped him out of the tub. Not too NSFW. If you pieced off the Roman Emperor Caracalla, he would sleep with your wife and then tell the details of the encounter the next day. In ancient Egypt, a god's wife was an honor typically given to high priestesses or pharaoh's first wife, the queen. This honor was solely for the woman to devote a part of her morning to pleasuring a pure golden statue of a god, typically Amen when this was practiced. Although many other gods received the same treatment. That's right folks. The most elite women of ancient Egypt ducked a gold statue every morning from a range of 12 to whenever they died. The one about Gandhi regularly group bathing, group sleeping, cuddling, and getting strip teases and lap dances from really young women. One of which was his grand, or great-grand, I can't recall, niece. To test his Zul restraint or whatever. Elagabalus is my favorite. Super young Roman emperor who also was a trans Zul prostitute. From Wiki. Cassius Dio reported that Elagabalus would paint his eyes, depilate his body hair and wear wigs before prostituting himself in taverns, brothels, and even in the imperial palace. Finally, he set aside a room in the palace and there committed his indecencies, always standing nude at the door of the room, as the harlots do, and shaking the curtain which hung from gold rings, while in a soft and melting voice he solicited the passers-by. There were, of course, men who had been specially instructed to play their part. For, as in other matters, so in this business, too, he had numerous agents who sought out those who could best please him by their foulness. He would collect money from his patrons and give himself airs over his gains. He would also dispute with his associates in this shameful occupation, claiming that he had more lovers than they and took in more money. Murdered at 18 by his own guards and thrown in the sewer. Then they went so far as to remove his name from all temples and remove all traces of him from society. I've heard that Mary Shelley lost her virginity to Percy Shelley on her mother's grave. Honestly, I wonder what her mother Mary Wollstonecraft would have thought of her daughter. She apparently wasn't fond of novels. A man in Pompeii died while masturbating. Legends never die. Gaius Valerius Catullus was a Latin poet of the late Roman Republic born in 84 BC. He greatly influenced later writers including Horace, Ovid, and Virgil. Here is one of his many NSFW poems. Up your ass and in your mouth, Aurelius. You too. Furious. You cocksuckers. Calling me dirt because my poems have naughty words in them. Just the poet's got to be a Boy Scout fellas. Not his goddamn poems. Anyway look. They've got wit. Sass. And sure they're lewd and lascivious. And can get somebody pretty hard up too. I mean not just young kids, but you hairy guys who can barely get your stiff asses going. So just because you read about a lot of kisses you want to put something nasty on me as a man? Duck you. Up your ass and in your mouth. Romans would sometimes execute women by making them have an LSX with horses and donkeys. Lyndon Johnson had a comically large penis that he would whip out in public with no provocation. Going back and forth with the Kennedys. President Andrew Johnson had the biggest penis out of all the presidents who have served in the US. Is DCK measurement part of the yearly presidential physical? When Katerina Sforza's kids were kidnapped, she responded to the ransom demands by hiking up her skirts for all to see and saying, "Go ahead. I can make more." There was a pope that fathered a child with his own daughter. No surprise. The creator of Wonder Woman, William Masto, not only was into bondage, seen in the first issues of Wonder Woman, but he and his wife had an affair with a young woman, who was a college student I believe. But it was consensual from what I read, as they were a polyamorous couple that would try to keep the relationship secret. His wife encouraged him to make Wonder Woman and he did. There once was a man from Nantucket, whose DCK was so long he could suck it. During World War I, French prostitutes with syphilis charged more money than non-infected ones. Contracting syphilis was some kind of blessing for the soldiers, because they would be sent to the hospital for 30 days, escaping the harsh living conditions of the trenches. Masturbation was once a prescribed form of relief for female schizophrenia. I've been jerking off all day, but the patient is still schizophrenic. Some terrible doctor. Jean-Jacques Rousseau had a spanking fetish. Don't we all? I'm kind of disappointed by the lack of OSHA facts. Vibrators were originally made by doctors to treat female hysteria. The reason is because they would originally finger women to treat the hysteria and they complained of carpal tunnel in their fingers. Ben Franklin was a dirty old man. He would sit at windows, fully nude, and flirt with nearly every woman that crossed his path. He also frequented brothels. Roman baths on their 16th birthday would be given a male prostitute, who would then teach them essentially how to be a top. After marriage, the prostitute would stay with the family as a servant. Often, this prostitute was also passed down from father to son. Shah Sultan Hussein Safavi, last king of Safavid Empire in Iran, was a super sex addict. Apparently he had sex with some thousands of women, and deflowered many girls. They used to tea in the halls of the Palace of Versailles. Could be wrong, but gay bathhouses were invented in the Roman Empire times. I believe underground they had coal burning furnaces or something to warm the water. I was taught this in 9th grade Latin. The gay sex was not mentioned, but wrestling was. Slaves ran the underground fires that heated the water and produced steam for the saunas. There are beautifully preserved pyranographic frescoes inside some of the buildings of the ruin of Pompeii. It depends on how you define NSFW, but it's said that when Parthia captured the Roman general Crassus they poured liquid gold down his throat. A heartwarming letter from mother to daughter that gives the pro tip of lean back and think of England on the topic of sex. Freud enjoyed a little sniff from time to time. Tiber Septim had an implant child during his affair with Queen Bainzia, which he had aborted. I remember reading something like Hans Christian Andersen kept a masturbation diary. Often visited prostitutes just to chat, after which he masturbated and then wrote about it. Was possibly bi, and likely died a virgin. I want to say that there is a theory or something that The Little Mermaid was inspired by a man that HCA loved, but who didn't love him. Not entirely NSFW or sourced, but you know. There was a man who was briefly Emperor of Rome, and his name was Pupienus Maximus. To this day I cannot stop giggling about it. Hans Christian Andersen was a chronic masturbator and wouldn't let women wank him off because he could do it better himself. I heard at some point Benjamin Franklin was in a sex cult or something like that. He was known to expound on the virtues of banging old ladies. There's a quote from him about how the body is still firm even when there are wrinkles on the face somewhere. Gandhi would sleep and bathe naked with his granddaughter-in-law, grandniece, and another younger woman. They were about 18 and he was in his late 70s. Bill Clinton banged his secretary. Don't tell anyone though. Ezekiel 23:20 talks about men who could come like a horse. Genghis Khan had sex with so many concubines so many times that several decades later, 1 out of 200 males somewhere around Asia are descendants of him. I think concubines? Probably more the arping part of arping and pillaging. In the Old Testament Torah, the Asherah poles that were condemned by God were just giant wooden penises that were erected, pun totally intended, to worship Asherah. Then they would have sex next to them on the high places to basically be pornography for the gods to see so they could get in the mood and get it on themselves. Guess what the rain was? James Joyce had a propensity to write some really raunchy love letters to the woman he was courting in the early 1900s. Language that is still pretty NSFW today. I learned about it through Hark, a Vagrant Comics, and read about it following that. True and startling. Cleopatra bathed in spunk. Summon the 10,000 slaves. I want to take a bath in around 6 hours. Ron Jeremy has a master's degree in special education. He does. I had my 21st birthday in Las Vegas and we ran into him at a lounge. We were all huge Boondock Saints fans and he was so excited that someone liked the movie that he came over and joined us for drinks for an hour. We had some education majors with us and they all talked about public schools, education, special education, and healthcare for a while. He's a really nice guy. Large portions of Anne Frank's diary were about periods and masturbation. Buzz Aldrin lost his virginity to a Mexican hooker. Back in the time of Caribbean pirates, there would be little splits in the wood on the deck. WTF man, it's no not November, this is dangerous shit. Carpophorus, a Roman gladiator, trained giraffes and other animals to pay women to entertain the Colosseum crowds. When the Mongols sacked Baghdad, upon defeating the army, the Mongols executed the majority of the remaining inhabitants, 500,000, by hand. The Mongol soldiers had to work in shifts to sever all of the heads. For days. And in between shifts, they had to continually sharpen their swords. You know. Because they kept getting dull from severing heads. Constantly. For days. On a related, personal note. When I was in Iraq, I had a Mongolian Majamari cousin who was my supervisor for a bit. One day, out of the blue, he said to me, "This is the second time that the Mongolians have been in Baghdad. The first time, the Tigris ran red with the blood of Iraqis." He then sat back, satisfied, with a sort of content grin on his face. Badass. Kennedy ducked bitches. My gramps was in the Secret Service and he absolutely hated Kennedy on a personal level for cheating on Jackie. He was also not a fan of Johnson for similar reasons. At first glance I thought this said Kentucky Fried Bitches and I was like, the duck is wrong with this guy? But then I looked again and was like, the duck is wrong with me? Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a letter to a friend of his detailing how he ducked an ugly old woman after she washed his clothes. What the hell? Luigi? An octopus will tear its own cock off only to launch it at a female octopus and the female will perform a sex act with the severed member. Detachable penis. The term beaver comes from colonial times when prostitutes would use a beaver pelt to cover themselves due to shaving off their pubic hair because they had crabs. Maybe not the best but most memorable part of my dissertation research. Triad smuggled heroin across the border of Thailand by buying dead babies and stuffing it inside them, then sending mothers across the border holding the sleeping babes. These babies needed replacing every 12 hours to stay fresh enough. Marie Bonaparte. Napoleon's grandniece or great-grandniece was very interested in female anatomy and conduct her own studies into what makes women frigid. She found out that clits were different distances from the vaginal opening. She hypothesized that the further from the vaginal opening the more likely a woman was to be frigid, non-orgasmic. She surprise had a clit further from the vaginal opening. She knew this doctor who said he had successfully relocated a clitoris on a cadaver, and so she let him remove and move her clitoris. Needless to say, it didn't work. And rumor says SJE never had another orgasm. But then she found Freud and it was all just penis envy anyways. Source: